15% of the federal budget is really on the table. For now, nobody is willing to touch the 85%. Why? Let's ask Utah Senator Orrin Hatch. He is the ranking Republican on the Finance Committee. We're talking primarily about entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, and the like, plus defense and security spending. Right, Senator?
Well, that's right. And everybody knows if we're going to go after entitlement programs, which we will have to do in order to get the spending, taxing, and borrowing under control, it's going to take presidential leadership, and the president has defaulted on that. He's not willing to lead out on that. I think he would find a number of us willing to work with him to get that under control. And when he starts talking about investments, that's just Washington speak for more spending. As a matter of fact, all of the so-called deficit reduction in his current budget is less than what the deficit is projected to be for this year, this fiscal year. That's over 10 years. All of his 10-year deficit reduction is less than the total deficit for this year, the projected deficit for this year that they projected. I mean, it's really pathetic. We're $14 trillion in debt now, actually more than $14 trillion, and by 2020 we'll be $22 trillion, and we'll be paying $1 trillion just in interest alone, unless we do something now. We can't wait till then. We can't wait for 10 years. We're going to have to do it, but it's going to take presidential leadership. No matter how strong some of us in Congress are, without presidential leadership, people aren't going to pay any attention to it, and they'll just demagogue it.
We're getting a lot of comments on our chat page. Michael D. sent in a comment. $230 billion in stimulus for pork barrel infrastructure was guaranteed to keep unemployment at 8%, and now they want more. He says, stop the madness. You get the sense that the American people are really ready to make some sacrifices, but Democrats and Republicans both in Washington aren't hearing it.
Well, we are willing to make sacrifices. I think the American people really are. I think they would face up to these responsibilities. I think most people, like Elaine and I, really are worried about our kids and grandkids and even great-grandkids. What kind of a future are they going to have, because we're so profligate today that we're spending their future away? And like I say, without presidential leadership, it isn't going to happen. And I really think Barack Obama would really cement himself in the eyes of people as a great president if he would start leading on these entitlement programs. And I think he'd find a number of Republicans, including myself, willing to work with him on it, even though people are scared to death of working on the entitlement programs.
There was criticism of the president when he appointed the Simpson-Bowles Commission, because a lot of people felt, okay, you're kind of taking this hot potato and handing it off to some unelected officials. But then they came out with their report, and much of what's in it is not contained in this budget. Many of the ideas about how to go about getting our budget under control.
Well, you'll notice he took hardly any of their suggestions, and there were a lot of good suggestions. There were some that weren't so good, but my gosh, you'd think he'd at least listen to his own commission. But it's like all commissions. They do that to get the onus off of themselves so that they can put it on the commission, and then they ignore the commissions afterwards. Now, look, we all know what has to be done. We know that 15% of the total budget is not going to solve the problem. We also know that, quote, investments, unquote, are just another name for spending, taxing, and borrowing. It's really not investments. It's throwing our future of our kids down the drain. And we all know that we cannot live with these huge deficits any longer. We all know that we've got to do something about entitlement programs, and that includes Social Security, which was never expected to cover people for 20, 30 years, because we're living longer. We've done a good job on health care. People live longer, and that puts a tremendous strain on Social Security. And I'm worried about, like I say, the children of the future. What's their future if we don't make the tough decisions now? But without presidential leadership, we're not going to do it.
Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah is the ranking member of the Budget Committee in the U.S. Senate. Senator, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, as we're talking about cuts, let's talk about some of the cuts in store for the Pentagon. The president making what he calls difficult